Hey guys, today I'm going to be reading an excerpt from On Grief and Grieving. It's from one of my other classes. It's a book we're reading, Finding the Meaning of Grief Through the 5 Stages of Loss. And this is just the anniversary edition. I'm going to be reading one of the first chapters. Over the course of my lifetime, I have come to know grief in its many forms, not just through the deaths of family and friends, but also in the feelings of loss that come with the inevitable life changes we all endure. In my struggles to sort through the sweeping mix of emotions that come with grief, I have found myself endlessly grateful for Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, and in particular for this book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. We are a grief-illiterate nation, and Kubler-Ross dedicated her life to helping people find peace in challenging losses. She gave us permission to grieve. Dr. Kubler-Ross let us know that none of us is alone in the devastating wake of feelings that come with the departure of those we love. She allowed us to let out a collective wail for all the losses we experience in our lives. In this book, she and David teach us how to grieve. I grew up in a family that had lots of tragedy, but no one ever discussed it. I moved through these experiences trying to make sense of the losses, without any guidance or framework for how to understand them. When I became an adult, I realized that I was still trying to process what had happened, and I thought to myself that there must be a better way. At some point, people began mentioning Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work to me, telling me that she had written about the 5 stages of grief. Every time this conversation about grief came up, so did her name, and I realized that talking about grief helped, and reading the works of Kubler-Ross reinforced the comfort the discussion could bring. When my mother died 4 years ago, I experienced the true depths of grief. I remember thinking when I was younger that if anything ever happened to my mother, I would never be able to survive. And then she died, and I was forced to face it. I had to relive it. It brought me to my knees. Then my uncle died 2 weeks after that, and then my father died a year and a half later. I was steeped in grief. It was an incredibly lonely experience. I felt isolated. My world stopped while everything continued around me. In my search for solace, I found comfort in others who had gone through the death or multiple deaths. Every time I came across someone else's story, I felt grief a little bit more, I felt a little less alone. And this is exactly why this book by Kubler-Ross and Kessler is so important. When you're grieving, sometimes your only constant companion is a book. My children's book about grief, What's Heaven, was born out of this understanding. When my grandmother died, my children had so many questions. Their questions made me realize that I was just as childlike in my understanding of grief as they were. I felt this need to address the curiosity we all have about loss in its many forms, including grieving a pet. People thought this book wouldn't sell, and then it went on to tremendous success, proving just how thirsty our culture is for the conversation about loss and how we cope with it.